This is a golden tiger in the wild, one of the rarest big cats you will ever see. And I missed the focus. Not because I didn't see it, not because I wasn't ready, but simply because my camera focused on the wrong thing. If you've ever come back from the field, looked at your photos, and realized that your subject is completely out of focus, you know how frustrating that feels. You spend all that time and effort, and the shot is just not usable. And sometimes that means you miss the moment entirely. In this video, I'm going to show you how I approach focusing in wildlife photography so that the next time you're out there, you nail that focus on your subject every single time. Okay, so let's first try to understand why we miss focus. See, in wildlife photography, most of us use continuous autofocus, AFC or AI servo, depending on the brand you use. And it makes sense, right? Because in wildlife photography, things are always moving. The subject can move. You can move. The distance between you and the subject can constantly keep on changing. In such situations, autofocus continuous or AFC helps you keep up with all of that by constantly adjusting focus so that something in the frame remains sharp. Manual focus in most situations just isn't practical. See, when the animal is moving in front of you, you can't keep turning the focus ring to keep it sharp. Now, at the simplest level, AFC is just your camera trying to keep something sharp within the focus area you have selected. For example, take a look at this scene. I'm using a wide focus area here, and there are 3 subjects. And AFC is actually doing its job perfectly. It's keeping something in the scene in focus. If you look at this subject right here, it's stack sharp. It's perfectly in focus. Now, I could even move the subject and AFC will keep maintaining focus, keeping Thanos sharp. See, that's the power of continuous autofocus. But now comes the obvious question. See, if autofocus is so good, why do we still miss focus? Why doesn't the camera just get it right every single time? The answer is actually very simple. See, your camera doesn't know what you want to focus on. When it focuses on something, it's not really identifying your subject. At a basic level, it's only looking for contrast, edges, or patterns, something it can lock onto in the frame. See, even in this scene, for that matter, the camera actually doesn't know what I think the subject is. It's just focusing on the object that is closest to the camera. But what if I wanted the figure in the middle instead to be in focus? And yes, you could very well argue that modern cameras, because of AI, actually know what the subject is because they have subject detection, eye tracking, and all that good stuff. But even then, the camera still doesn't know what your intent is. Imagine there are 4 animals in the frame. The camera might detect one of them, track its eye, but you actually might want a completely different one in focus. So in a way, your camera is guessing. And that's the first reason you miss focus, because the camera simply makes the wrong guess. Which also means the goal is very simple. We just need to reduce that guesswork. And that is where focus areas come in. See, focus areas are how you tell the camera where to look. So instead of your camera searching the entire frame, you're limiting it to a specific part of the scene. You're basically saying, hey, don't look everywhere, just look here. But now there's a second problem. See, if you choose the wrong focus area, you'll still miss focus. At the end of the day, it really comes down to one thing. Which focus area should you use and for which situation? And that's exactly what we are going to break down next. First of all, you need to understand one thing. You cannot survive wildlife photography by using just one focus area. The broader idea is to use the focus area based on what the situation actually demands. See, the focus area you use for a subject that is very close to you will be very different from a situation where the subject is actually far away. Similarly, what you use for moving subjects, for example, is going to be quite different from what you would use for stationary subjects. So the idea is that we shouldn't get stuck to just one focus area. Rather, create a strategy where we can pick a focus area that works for a specific situation. Let's look at some of these situations so that you kind of get what I'm talking about. Let's start with the first situation, when your subject is actually close to you. If your subject is close and large in the frame, say it's coming towards you or covering a significant part of the scene, this is actually one of the easiest situations to nail focus. And the best way to handle this is to use eye tracking. See, because the subject is large in the frame, the camera can easily detect it and it can lock onto the eye very reliably. And this is exactly what you want. Take a look at this. I'm using eye tracking to track Simba's eye here. You see how sticky it is? Since he is quite dominant in the frame, eye tracking does an excellent job here. If your camera doesn't have eye tracking, I think the next option is to use zone or a larger focus area, something big enough to comfortably cover your subject's face. You can simply place the zone over your subject's face and the camera will focus on something within that area. This works really well when the subject is large and clearly visible. And a focus area which is, let's say, slightly bigger than the animal's head will help you in compensating for the subject's movement. But there is a catch. See, the problem with larger focus areas like zone is that the camera is still picking a point based on contrast in that zone. It can latch on to anything in the zone and focus on that. So, if you specifically want the eye in focus, for example, zone might still fail you. It can easily lock onto the nose or some other feature of the face. And if you're shooting at wider apertures like f2.8, for example, the eye won't be tack sharp. Look at this photo, for example. I took this at f2.8 using zone as the focus area. You can clearly see that the nose is in focus and not the eye. So in this situation, one simple thing you can do is actually stop down your aperture slightly. See, if you shoot wide open, for example at f2.8, what happens is that the depth of field is very shallow. So only a small part of the subject will be sharp. But if you stop down to something like an f5.6 or f8, your depth of field increases. And even if the focus is not perfectly on the eye, you are much more likely to get it sharp. Now look at this one. I'm again using zone here, but my aperture here is f8. You see how the eye is considerably sharper compared to the previous image? Now, if you still want to use the widest aperture on your camera and your camera doesn't have eye tracking, the only option you have is to use a small focus area and place it precisely on the eye of your subject. This can give you very accurate results, but it works best when the subject is relatively still, sitting, standing, or not moving much. Because just imagine, if it's moving, it'll be a nightmare for you to constantly keep adjusting to ensure that the small focus area rests on top of the eye. Now, let's look at another situation. When your subject is slightly far away, or in other words, it occupies a small part of your frame. Let's say roughly a third of the frame. See, when the subject is far, it becomes smaller in the frame and it starts blending into the environment. And this is where autofocus actually starts to struggle. If you use a bigger focus area in such situations like zone, the camera will again start guessing and it might latch on to something else in that zone very easily. Also, subject detection and eye tracking, for example, may not work as well because they need the subject to be more dominant in the frame to work. So this is where you move to smaller focus areas, something like a spot. The idea should again be to simply cover the face of the animal with the focus area. So choose a focus area which is only big enough to cover the subject's face, not bigger than that. Another great option here is real-time tracking. You can simply use a tracking focus area and simply point it at the subject. The autofocus will latch onto that area and follow its movement, keeping it always in focus. See, in this case, I can simply place the tracking box over Simba's face and start tracking him. Now, as he moves, the tracking area follows him across the frame, keeping him in focus. And frankly, this works really well for subjects that are not very close to you but are moving constantly. But just keep in mind that tracking relies on the camera being able to clearly follow the subject. If the surroundings around your subject are cluttered, or if the subject blends into the background, tracking can jump and you will lose the subject. So use it when the background or surroundings are relatively clean. Now let's look at another situation when your subject is in a lot of clutter. And this is super common in wildlife photography. You have grass, branches, leaves, and your subject is somewhere inside all of that. Now, in these situations, autofocus will struggle a lot because there are multiple objects in the frame and many of them might have stronger contrast or they would stand out more than your subject. So, if you use something like a zone, essentially a bigger focus area, there's a very high chance that the camera will focus on something else entirely. And even tracking can fail in these situations simply because your camera might lock onto the wrong thing and then continue tracking that instead of your subject. So, in this situation, you need to take full control. And this is where you switch to the smallest focus area that your camera has to offer, something like an extra small spot. Now, instead of giving your camera a big area, you're being very precise. You're telling it exactly where to focus. You place that focus area carefully on your subject and ignore everything else in the frame. Trust me, this is the most reliable way to focus in clutter. And this is where I've seen a lot of people struggling because they try to use larger focus areas in messy scenes and the camera just keeps jumping to the wrong thing. So I think you get the idea by now. See, there can be many different situations out there, but the goal is always the same. You have to use a focus area that works for the situation you are in. Now, to actually do this in the field, you need to be able to switch focus areas quickly. A very practical way to do that is to assign focus area selection to one of the custom buttons on your camera. So instead of digging into menus every single time, you can change your focus area instantly as the situation changes around you. Let's talk about the harsh truth. See, you might do everything right. You're using autofocus continuous, you selected the right focus area, and you still might miss focus sometimes. Let me show you what I mean. Look at this scene. I have a subject against a very bright background and I'm trying to shoot, let's say, a silhouette. Here, you can actually see the camera struggling to focus. It keeps going back and forth, and this is what we call focus hunting. Even though I have selected the right focus area, I am using autofocus continuous. The camera just doesn't have enough contrast to latch onto. So what can you do in such situations? The first thing you can actually try is to focus on edges. Look for areas in your frame where contrast is higher. For example, the edge where the subject actually meets the background. That boundary often gives the camera enough information to lock focus. Now, you will see similar issues when you're shooting through fog or dust. See, fog and dust act like layers on top of your scene and they reduce contrast significantly. And in those cases, even focusing on edges sometimes just might not work. At that point, the only real option is to switch to manual focus and use the focus ring to get your subject sharp. See, this will happen only, I think, in very rare situations. And most of the time, your autofocus will work just fine. But it's important to understand the limitations of your camera because when the moment happens, you should still be able to get the shot or at least try to get the shot. So yeah, when everything fails and autofocus simply doesn't work, don't give up. Use the focus ring to focus on your subject. So if you take a step back, focusing in wildlife photography is actually not that complicated. It really comes down to a few simple decisions. See, when you use continuous autofocus, your camera is always trying to focus on something. Your job is to tell it what that something should be. Don't use a single focus area. Rather, switch it based on what the situation demands. Remember, autofocus is an incredible tool that is simply waiting for you to point it in the right direction. Alright, I hope this helped. If it did, consider subscribing. I am Shantanu and I'll see you in the next one.